Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and today we have a very special guest in the intro. Bill, you made it for the intro this time.
I think so, and I know. In fact, I'm kind of scared. Maybe that's a good transition.
It is. You might have heard the spooky music. It is Halloween. Well, the day before Halloween. Bill, who is our guest on? Give us a very brief. We only got a few minutes. Give us a very brief introduction to our guest today.
Yeah, Chris Darton is a filmmaker. He's a writer, producer, and he's going to tell us about the Damnation, which is a Halloween-type film, a horror film. And we're looking forward to seeing and hearing all about the kind of the anatomy of making a microfilm based on a limited budget. And again, the most important thing, it's a setting is in Northern Ontario.
It is. He made it in Southern Ontario, but a lot of ties to Northern Ontario and a lot of the Indigenous culture here in Northern Ontario. So that's all coming up. But first, a word from today's sponsor.
Hi, I'm Natasha Laframboise, sales representative with the Laframboise team at Realty Executives Local Group Inc. Brokerage. We are a local real estate team here in North Bay. Our team of sales representatives, Matt Laframboise, Phil Seguin, and Adam Legros, are ready to help you through the buying and selling experience. We have been providing service to the North Bay and area community for over 17 years. Our goal is to provide knowledge, support, and guidance in order to prepare your home for sale, bring it to market using multiple selling strategies, and get it sold. As a home buyer, we have 2 buyer's agents ready to help you find your home sweet home. If you'd like to know more, check us out on our website, laframboiseteam.ca. We are always happy to help.
Well, just before we get into our episode today, we do want to just say quickly, we love your feedback. We love your new ideas. If you have any great suggestions, whether it's content, interview, guests, whatever, for this show, for To North Bay with Love, for Echo Essentials, any of the podcasts that are on our network, maybe there's a topic that hasn't been covered. You feel like a lot of people would be interested in the community, or maybe you want to make a contribution to the Echo Essentials newsletter. It's very easy. Just email editor@NorthBayEcho.ca. That's editor@NorthBayEcho.ca. And we'd love to hear your feedback, and we want to hear your voice because that's what the Echo Network's all about. And of course, deadlines for the newsletter are noon on Tuesday or Thursday, although we will obviously need more time to arrange guests. So again, tell us what shows and what guests you'd like. So that brings us to today's guest. And before we get to that, this episode is about a film that's upcoming called The Damnation. And here's a little excerpt and a little clip from the trailer.
Kill the buffalo, you kill the Indian. Well, that's what they used to say on the plains. Destroy an enemy's resources. Take away anything he has to trap. There's no fur trade for commerce or clothing. No ecosystem to live off of or to harvest. We'll starve them out.
Got a target on your back. I'm sorry it's like that, but it is.
Town's got a curse. This whole damn area's got a death curse.
So that was a quick preview of The Damnation. So just quickly, this is taken from that trailer. I'll put the link in the description as well. This is taken from the trailer blurb on YouTube. So The Damnation takes place in the small, fictional, largely Indigenous Canadian communities of Creek and Buffalo Mines. Since the closing of the mines a number of years ago, the area is a shell of its once thriving past. The area is mostly made up of seniors and Indigenous people who have inhabited the area for hundreds of years. To further complicate matters, developers, led by a mysterious religious figure, have started clear-cutting the land, helping to unearth a malignant evil that begins not only destroying the environment, but feeding on the blood of the locals. 18-year-old Sarah Blackais, I believe, is that how you say it, Chris?
It is, indeed.
Blackais, perfect. Is forced into taking action when her cousin Jimmy is killed. Sarah, along with her cousin Birdie and their friend Wes, approached a local talk radio host on a show about myths, monsters, and urban legends for his expertise in helping combat the evil that has risen. Together, this unlikely team must band together to overcome the dark malevolence they're confronted with. And today, joining us is award-winning documentary filmmaker Chris Darton, who has written the screenplay and will produce and co-direct the film alongside co-director Sebastian Goodan. Chris, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me today, gentlemen.
Well, you know what, Chris and Ben, I've been on to some pretty spooky places on the Backroads. And actually, when I'm listening to that description on the trailer on YouTube, is that this is not this is kind of like nonfiction, not fiction. I can tell you that. But we're going to dive deep into the Damnation, and because what intrigued me, I've known Chris for a bit, but what intrigues me, because this is a Northern Ontario setting, and it could play out in real terms, but nonetheless, it's neat to see that a film that has a micro budget is now released and soon to be distributed, and we can take, for instance, on the Backroads Bill podcast, that this is has a Northern Ontario feel to it.
Yeah, this is really cool, and it's really neat to have Chris here. So Chris, why don't you just take us a little bit about a quick backstory of who you are as a filmmaker, and exactly what this film is, and why you wanted to make it.
I've been around for 100 years. I you
look amazing for 100
yeah,
years.
thank you. I went to school for art initially at Sheridan College in illustration, and veered over into filmmaking, which is something I'd done as a kid. We had a little Super 8mm camera. I was born and raised in Fort Erie, Ontario, and we used to go down and shoot. Our films were always hybrid films. They were creature films mixed with martial arts, always. We had that was our obsessions, was horror films and Bruce Lee. So every film we made, there was creatures, and they always knew martial arts. That was kind of what we did. We were, and so I went to Sheridan College for film, and afterward I worked for many years trying to develop screenplays and be a screenwriter while I raised a family and stuff like that. And it just didn't happen. Like, it was just something I just couldn't turn that corner and have that big success, or go into it as a full-time thing. I always worked side jobs and whatnot and whatnot, and to support my family and everything. But I came close developing a TV series. I had a producer attached. I worked on it for a year and a half. I wrote the first 3 episodes of it, and it didn't happen. And that's when I made the conscientious decision that I could kind of keep spinning my wheels until I'm 85 years old. If I'm going to make it happen, I need to do it myself. I need to start hustling more. I had 2 musician friends in my life, Danny Brooks and Gary Kendall, of the Downchild Blues Band, who I watched as models. They were older than me. They were still having successful careers, but they were out there doing the legwork every single day. They were making phone calls. They were booking their own gigs. They were carrying their own equipment. They were traveling all over. And I really kind of embraced that this is the way it's going to have to be for me. This is the way I make it happen. So I started making documentaries, and I did well with it. I made a couple feature-length documentary music-related films. And then I started making some shorts. And then I hooked up with a few guys in the Niagara region, Southern Ontario, who were horror guys. They were much younger than me. They had done small, format horror films for many years, and they wanted to bring me on as a producer. So, I finally got that taste of it. It was something I'd always wanted to do. I always wanted to make narrative films, especially horror films. I always really enjoyed horror films. So I got a nice taste of it, and the model was let's make a few horror films, shorts. Let's put together our tribe. Let's learn the ropes. Let's get to know one another, and then let's kind of go for it. So I went from A to B to kind of, I jumped into like D, E, F, and just said, I'm doing it. I'm going to do it. I don't know. There's an expiry date on these things. I think these things we do like this. And I was getting older, and I thought I just need to go for it. So I put together this script, and what I did was I married up what I knew most, and that was I had just graduated from Indigenous Studies at Laurentian University in my 50s. I took that knowledge of Indigenous communities, Indigenous issues, married it up with horror themes, very much ground in reality. That's kind of how I write everything. Obviously, a lot of subtext into the issues going on, everything from unsafe drinking water to missing women, without having a sledgehammer effect and beating people over the head with it. I like subtleties. I like weaving that tapestry in and not being kind of bashing people with it. So that's kind of where I went with it. And the mandate was very simple. I wanted a feature length horror film. It was going to be extremely low budget. And there was going to be Indigenous people in the leads. The characters were going to be Indigenous people. I was going to bring Indigenous people in to play them. And I wanted those people portrayed as in the driver's seat of their own fate. I wanted them to be smart. I wanted them to be educated. I wanted to break some barriers. I didn't want those old damaging stereotypes that have been around forever, and Indigenous people know these things. We know about the store Indian. We know about the town drunk. We know about the stoic, war chief and stuff like that. So I wanted to kind of switch things up in that, and that's kind of where I went with it and what I did.
Yeah, as an Indigenous filmmaker, I think you feel good about what's transpired in the production. Let's dissect a few things, and let's start with the setting. It is Northern Ontario, and again, you're all about reality, about the closure of mines, which happens in this clear cutting. So tell us a little just about the setting, how that came, because when you write a script, you've got to have sense of place, and you've got to bring the viewer into sense of place.
Absolutely. Northern Ontario is near and dear to my heart. My family roots, the Indigenous side of the family, are Temiskaming First Nation in Quebec, the Abitibi inland area of Moose Factory Flying Post. And, I spent a lot of time up north as a kid. I was very fond of it. And I just felt that remote vibe of Northern Ontario just foot the bill. Now, did I have the money to go to Northern Ontario to shoot it? I did not. So what I did was I shot it in Southern Ontario, in the communities I know, in Niagara. But I kept it very grounded in trying to not show a McDonald's, trying to not show a Tim Hortons. Nobody in the entire film uses a cell phone, save for one character in one short instance. And he's kind of a fringe character that's kind of a bad guy in the film and that. But I didn't want that savior. I didn't want that easy out of, let's grab a cell phone and call for help. So I kind of, it's kind of a timeless kind of world. It's kind of world building. It is a different vibe. It does have a 70s, 80 vibe to it because, there's not that ready technology and there's not new fancy cars in it. Like, there's a couple trucks in it that they drive and stuff like that, but nothing like that is ever really highlighted and stuff. So I really wanted to give it that more or less that barren northern feel, like for very remote parts of the north. So I did have drone footage from Northern Ontario in a place that you might know called Samuel de Champlain Park that I had shot that we integrated here and there into it. And it really led to the feel of the film and the nuances and stuff. So it does have there's an interesting vibe to it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I am again, and I think again your comment about the timeless nature of the film, but certainly the setting. But let's go into the characters. And how did you choose Sarah in particular as a young Native woman, so to speak?
when you're working the way I do, the nature of the way I do at not a low budget, maybe I'll veer into that for 1 second. And that's that when I say low budget, there's a caveat to that. Low budget in Hollywood right now is $40 million or more. So when people say to me, "Oh, you made a low budget film," I didn't really. I go, this veers into what we call micro budget or guerrilla filmmaking is what it is. And uh so I guess the long and short of it is we pulled off a film at about a $30,000 price point. So how do you do that? You use people you know, use locations that are familiar, you find actors where you can. Now, I didn't want the film to just be a folly. I mean, I'm in my late 50s, so I wanted this one to count, and I wanted it to very much be a gateway to the next film that maybe is funded and we get a little bit of financing for. So I knew of a friend whose daughter had done a bit of acting. I grew up with her uncles. I knew the family, and we met. We had lunch one day, or grabbed a coffee one day, and I met the girl who is Norma Sue Whitlow, who's one of the 3 stars of my film. And sitting there for an hour with her, I essentially went back. I had the basis and ideas for the film. I wrote the character around her because she is a young, smart, pretty Indigenous woman. And I wanted that for my lead character. So that one came about really organically. The some of the other characters in the film, you know, I knew an actor here and there. I brought Ryan Lunn in, who plays Remy, and a lot of the dialogue and kind of textures and nuances of the way Remy talks that I wrote around Ryan Lunn, how what I knew of him and stuff like that. So I built the character's voice around this real person. And then the third lead that I guess I should mention, because the story is an incredible, one of happenstances, is, I got to a point where I had a large part of the film cast, and I needed, 2 Indigenous leads still. And that's a tough find. I didn't have money, I didn't have the resources, and I didn't have the network. I was new at a lot of this. I traveled down a lot of untested highways for me. So I'm sitting at home one day and I'm watching TV and I see this Cam H commercial. And there's 4 or 5 different actors speaking. And the final actor is this big, dark-skinned, long-haired Cree with a gravelly voice. And I thought, that is the type of guy I would love to have. But you're not getting him because A, he's probably got an agent. B, you don't even know his name. And forget it. Just put it out of sight, out of mind. A couple months later, in desperation, I put a ad out on Facebook, a Facebook acting site for the Niagara region for 2 Indigenous males. Well, 2 people contacted me, and they both ended up in my film. And the guy I was just talking about, Osawa, he sends me a couple demos of things he's done. And sure enough, he was the guy in the Cam H ad. So it was pure happenstance. And he became a true champion of the film. He went from a small part into a big part, and he was there every step of the way because the trajectory of this film, how it was shot, is very unusual in that it was a 3-year process. And, I've used the analogy before, but you never set sail hoping that it turns into Gilligan's Island, but sometimes it does. You know what I mean? That's just the nature of the beast, shooting a film in this nature. So, yeah, and then one other thing about Osawa is in the layoff in between us shooting, he scored the the hit Canadian miniseries Little Bird, and he's one of the leads on that, and they won Best Ensemble Cast, so he's really having a moment in the sun right now and having some great success.
Well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the some of the allegories or the hidden meanings in this film, because there's obviously, as you already mentioned, there's a lot of ties to the way that like Indigenous culture is, and some of the struggles that are faced. And being in Northern Ontario, we're even as like a white male, like I know a lot of that's the struggles that they have. I've worked with a lot of people who've lived on reserves and who've talked about like some of, again, like the drinking water or some of the gang violence that happens and all of this stuff. I just wanted to ask a little bit about what allegories did you really put into this film, and what were you really thinking about trying to bring to light, I think, to the broad community?
Well, Ben, first of all, it's not a struggle to work with you, but we do want to find out about the mysterious religious figure, and that's a great question.
Yeah, so, it's a good time to be Indigenous. It really is. I mean, there's a lot of people, communities turning the corner right now. They're, they're getting educated, they're knowledgeable, they're a voice now advocating for themselves and their communities. And like I said before, I never really wanted that sledgehammer effect of beating people over the head with a message. It's a little horror film, and I recognize that. I embrace that. But horror is a really, really good genre to weave in some meaning. It allows you to do that. You can have a bit of a political voice, and I'm not really a political guy, but there was things in the film of really deep meaning that I worked in, and that was certainly there's an overriding presence of the missing women, which is a huge issue in Indigenous communities. And there is certainly mention of oppression. There is land appropriation. There's mention of language. There's talk of at one point in time, a couple of the leads say something along the lines of, "We need to leave. We need to get out of here," which is always the quick and easy out. Well, of course, you need to work around that if you're going to make this thing happen. And my lead, Sarah Black Ice, says, "I'm not leaving. Our family's lived here for over 400 years. We're connected here." And, and that's a fact. That's the way these communities are. That's how these communities thrived at one time, is because they knew the land. They knew the weather. They knew nature. They knew everything that was going on with in their communities and that's how they lived and survived. And there is certainly connectivity and rootedness, and that's a very Indigenous thing. And family. There's a real special family thread throughout this, that these people are related and they're connected through those relations. And I was able to work in, I mean, there's a lot of little special things that maybe a lot of people won't appreciate, but I was raised by very strong women. My father was a wonderful man, but on the Indigenous side of my family, my mom is a very strong, vocal woman. My aunts were very strong women. My grandmother and great-grandmother were very strong women. They came out of the fur trade. They trapped. They hunted. They were guides. You know what I mean? So that's a very special upbringing. I don't do that stuff, but I was raised in that family, and I know those things and that. So there's special little nuances in the film. Like, there's a scene where one of the characters walks in and he says to Sarah, "Sarah, are you making breakfast?" And she says, there's cereal on the counter and carnations in the cupboard. and he says, are you kidding me? And she says, no. Kokum, grandma, said, if you add water, it tastes just like milk. Those are words right out of my grandmother's mouth. And I mean, carnations does not taste like milk. Believe me, it's not, you know. So, and then she says, there's bologna in the keeper. It's a little old. Just fry it up and it'll be fine. And those were words right out of my grandmother's mouth. So I weaved in a lot of stuff like that, that it's nice in the film. It adds a lot of context. Maybe people won't know it other than a few of my family members, but it's special to me.
So we're going to take a quick break from Chris and the Damnation to give one of our sponsors for today's episode, Casey's. And Bill, before we start this, there was a little bit of beef on the Essentials podcast when you said Casey's was one of the oldest restaurants. Scott said that he had to fact check you because he said you said that it was the oldest restaurant. So I just want to give you a little bit of clarity and give you a chance to respond to that.
Well, I feel like Donald Trump now with all these falsehoods. Casey's is one of the current oldest restaurants in North Bay. It's been a fixture of our landscape for quite some time. Others have come and gone and disappeared, especially downtown. But Casey's has remained part of the community, I think, for approximately 40 years.
Something, I think it was let me fact check that. 1969, I believe, was what it is. 39 years is what they say. So that's on their website.
It's 1 year off, so I'm right and everyone else is wrong.
There you go. Well, you know what you can do this weekend, Bill? You can head on down to Casey's Restaurant in North Bay for an unforgettable get-together right off the highway. Dive into some delicious appetizers and enjoy the best drafts in town. What's your favorite thing on the menu there, Bill?
Well, I think the last time I said about the roasted red pepper soup, that's one of my favorites there. And they make a French onion soup too. But I've always enjoyed Casey's because it's a kind of a standby and a go-to, and you can always expect good food. You
almost can say it's the perfect spot to unwind, to catch up with friends and savor great flavors. Don't miss out on the fun. Join us at Casey's for a weekend filled with good food, great drinks, and even better company.
I'm looking forward to you buying me a beer.
Wow. We'll see. Maybe the day will come. We'll see. Now let's get back to Chris.
It's really interesting as we go through this conversation that you're not giving anything away in the film too, and I know you won't. So back to that mysterious religious figure, because right now I'm looking down at and I can hold it up, but this is the static. I guess I got to move it this way, Ben. And there's a blade going through the front of the church, and the moon in the background. There's some blood coming out of the windows, et cetera, et cetera. So, people often ask Backroads Bill when I write stories about the title, but tell us a little bit about the symbolism of this particular icon and the title.
Like I said, what a long, strange trip it's been. I mean, the Grateful Dead was right. This has been quite a journey.
I know that song.
This has been quite a journey. I mean, when I say that it's been 3 years, that's 3 years since the start of shooting, and probably another 6 months before that for me writing it, planning it, putting it all together. But it started off as a vampire film called The Damnation of Dracula. And in September and October of 2021, we shot for 14 days. And we had some really good material. And we were really worn out, and I was really beaten up by the process. It was extremely challenging, extremely hard. It took a lot out of us. We shot on big equipment. Which is to say, we didn't shoot on a cheap camera and that. We shot on an expensive camera with expensive lighting, and we had a couple people that were seasoned in using it, and then we had a lot of people just willing to help, and that was a real challenge. Moving equipment from A to B to C was a challenge. Everything was very tough. So we shot for those 14 days. I looked at the footage and there was something there, but I didn't know what it was. And certainly the path we were going down wasn't going to work. So we took we took a year and a half off, basically. And as I like to put it, to reset and kind of circle the wagons and figure out this thing. Where are we at? What do we have? And where do we go with it? So between my son, who shot the film, Toby, and my editor, Frank, we discussed it a lot. You know, should we go left? Should we go right? Should we jig? Should we jag? Should we? And I mean, there was a lot of things that came up. Should we make it a short film? Should we make a really good short film as opposed to a lousy long film? Does that better serve me and us as a team? Do I scrap the project completely? Crossed my mind. It wasn't in the cards. It wasn't never going to happen, but it did cross my mind. And what happened was my son took a really small mustard seed of an idea that we knew we needed to fix some of the footage we had, and he went out and shot one day. I mean, we hadn't been shooting for a year and a half. It was stagnating, and I didn't know when we were going to get moving again or how. And he went and shot a little scene, and it fueled me. I saw how we could go about this in a different way. We don't need to shoot for 6-7 straight days. We don't need to shoot for 4 days and have to put people in hotels and pay a lot for food, because those were huge expenses for me. Maybe we shoot a day here, 2 days there, another day here. And that's when I came up with the idea of, I exercised the vampire idea in a way that I would still be able to use the existing footage, and I brought in a priest. And what I did was I veered toward that colonizer idea. I veered toward, the oppression idea and the raw stealing of the land idea. And so where I had Indigenous subtext before, I just upped that ante some. And the film became even more grounded and more rooted in some of these cultural aspects. And you're never sure if that stuff's going to work. I mean, I'm not Stanley Kubrick. I'm not Martin Scorsese. I like to think that I had my finger on the pulse of something. And then as I think, shot the next day of time, whether we got out and shot, we shot a really pivotal scene. I'd brought in an actor to play the priest. He was wonderful. Local radio legend, Tim Dennis, 50 years in radio, did a wonderful job, local theater and stuff. And my son phoned me because we talked about it a lot. We were talking about this thing. We were beating it and beating ourselves up. You know, what can we do right? What do we need to do next time? How do we figure this thing out? How do we switch gears and make all this work? Toby phones me one day and he says, "This is crazy. What's going on?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You've taken out a massive, major element of this film. You've rewritten it while still being able to use what we've shot for the most part. And I think it's better." And my feeling was, and I said to him, "I think it is too, but I don't know." And then we moved forward. So we started shooting again from May 2023. I'm embarrassed to say because we just had our premiere in Buffalo, New York, September 19th. And I think we shot 1 or 2 shots in like late July. The film was done, everything was edited, and we still went back and got a couple extra shots and stuff like that. But that's the way it goes. That's guerrilla filmmaking. I mean, you throw in the kitchen sink, you go all in, and you figure it out. I mean, you haven't got that cash hose to wash away any issues you have. You need to think outside the box and really figure this thing out. That's kind of what we did.
It's the anatomy of filmmaking, and that's why I'm really intrigued with the conversation, because people, I don't think they necessarily know the whole process from start to finish. And when you start out with something with a micro budget and a belief And I know for passion sells, and passion will get you through it. And I really like the conversation we're having with regards to all the symbolism and all the Indigenous, the realism of today, from the past. And I think people will look at that, and I think can get a lot out of it. And who knows where this will go. But I also want to know, like, where's this film going and what's next? If we can, can look into the mind of the filmmaker.
Yeah, well, we had our premiere September 19th in Buffalo, New York. It was at a festival called Amazing Fantasy Fest. It really caters to genre filmmaking. The gentleman that runs it, Gregory Lambertson, is kind of a Western New York filmmaking legend for films like Slime City, Johnny Gruesome. It's been around forever. And Greg has always been a great kind of source of information or a backup, a mentor in that to a lot of young filmmakers and people that are out there mucking around doing this thing. So he screened our film as the closing night film, the final film of the festival. And I sat there through the film before it, which was very different than my film, and to say the least. And I started thinking, oh boy, are they going to get it? My film is very, very Canadian. It's very Canadian in its settings. It's very Canadian in its nuances. It's very Canadian in its characters. Are they going to get it? And the film played. It's 80 minutes long. We had a wonderful Q&A discussion panel afterward. And at one point in the Q&A, Greg, moderating it, said, maybe you could explain to the audience Northern Ontario. And I thought, oh, yeah, right. I mean, that makes sense. But I mean, sometimes it's things that you don't think of. So I said to them, there's a line in the film, pardon me, where a character says something went on, something happened with a creature. And Remy, one of my main characters, says, did you call the police? And he says, you know where we live. Sometimes we're lucky to have a cop every 180 kilometers. I mean, we're talking really remote. But I mean, it just gives a vibe of some of those really sparse communities and that. And people were kind of floored by that, oh, there's a place in the world not that far from me that's actually like that. But, it was nice. And they did appreciate it. We had really good feedback from the film. So will there be a next film? Yeah, absolutely. We learned a lot. We learned a lot about what to do, what not to do. You always learn a lot about who is coming with you on the ride the next time. Who's your tribe? Who are the people that are going to be there and gut this thing out? Because I'm going to be honest with you. There were some talented people that worked on this film. But at the end of the day, it's not the talent that gets it done or gets it finished. And sometimes it's not even the talent that makes it a good film in the end. It's a contributing factor. But this film was as much about gutting it out, determination, and just really, saying to myself, it's going to get done. It's going to take a bit, but I'm going to make it happen. Not finishing it isn't in the cards, and it never will be in that. So, yeah. So there'll be a next film, and we're gonna, once again, it'll probably be Indigenous based. It'll be a little different than this one. I guess I can say that it will have some horror elements, but it'll be a siege film. In other words, a group of characters under siege. And I'll do that. I'll go down that same Chris Darton path. I'll weave in the Indigenous subtext, and I'll have Indigenous characters in it and non-Indigenous characters, and I'll continue to shine light on some of those issues in somewhat of a subtle manner, so that it's a teaching tool, not a hammering it in tool, and because ultimately you want to entertain. I mean, the film needs to move. That was really important with this. It needs to. The last thing you want. I learned that when I was making documentaries. The last thing you want is to bore your audience. So it needs to move, and I think we were really successful with that. It's a very interesting film, and I think people are going to see it, and I think they would be shocked at the price point. I think people would see it and they would go, "Oh, I thought this was a $200,000 film or a much, much bigger budgeted film," because it looks fantastic and the acting is very real. And the sound design and the score and everything is very rich in it. It feels like a big film.
Well, the trailer does that, and of course, we want to watch it, and it may not be on APTN tomorrow, but what are the next steps so the listeners and viewers on the Backroads Bill podcast can see it?
APTN would definitely be a target. Currently, it played in Buffalo for the premiere. It's playing next Tuesday here in Niagara at the First Ontario Performing Arts Film House, which is a wonderful venue. It does a lot of great programming and it does a lot of work with the Indigenous community. It's playing November 3rd at that same venue. And October 20th, I'm at Six Nations Reservation presenting the film and speaking. And I'll be speaking at all those events as well. After that, I've entered it in a lot of film festivals. And it's currently sitting with two different distributors, one in the States and one in Canada. Where that goes, I don't know. Some of that is untested ground for me. A lot of that stuff is new. And I like to think that I can get a film made. I have that in my bag of tricks. I know how to make that happen. The unproven unknown is finding a venue, finding a platform, and getting it out there into the world. That's a little more difficult, but we'll see. It's going well. We've had 2 reviews out so far, just from people that saw it in Buffalo, and they were glowing reviews. And I'm not going to let that get to my head because I know what's going to happen. I know somebody's going to come along and say, "This is rotten." And that's just what happens. That's the nature of it. It's all subjective. Everything with art is subjective. And this is the problem with criticism sometimes, right? I mean, you go into that, if you're a critic and you go into that theater and you've just had a rotten day and you're sitting there watching somebody's film, maybe it comes out as a rotten review or maybe it just doesn't register with you. That can happen. But we're doing okay. I mean, we've put something pretty solid out into the world. I'm doing legwork on a daily basis. And thank you for podcasts like yours. I mean, for giving me a platform to come out and speak on it. I mean, these things, every little bit helps. So I appreciate it.
Well, the Backroads Bill podcast is worldly. We know that from the analytics and people that contact us. But I really like the comments, Ben, about the education and the awareness and the messaging, and that's what we'll look forward to seeing in the Damnation. But I know you've got some final comments.
Yeah, that was first of all, congrats on the. I know it's a lot of work, and obviously this has been a multi-year thing. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You just talked about the messaging. I kind of have a twofold thing. First of all, is there funding that's available for specifically Indigenous films, or is there anything that you can do if your film is in that kind of genre to kind of help filmmakers get their message across?
So there's a lot of funding out there. It's not easy to get. It's a difficult path. With making an Indigenous-based horror film, there's a real double-edged sword there. It's an Indigenous-based film, which helps, but it's a horror film. So there's a stigma around it with the funding. I've applied for multiple grants through my last 12 years. I'm making documentaries and whatnot, and I've never been successful at them. I've come close. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a weird story in that I went to apply for a grant. I was in the online portal that you create and you see your past grants. And I saw one of them 2 years previous and it said successful beside it. And I was like, wait a second. I never received a cent for that grant. What's going on? So I had to make calls, emails, and whatnot. And I was told that I was the successful recipient of this $40,000 grant. But when it came time to hand the money out, there was no funding left. I was at the end of the stream. So I thought, ooh, wow, that hurts. But I knew at least I was close. I knew at least that I was doing something right. So that was really nice. I applied for a couple grants during the process of the Damnation to help along the way. One was a really small grant that I thought for sure I would get. I didn't. So it's a challenge, those things. I think that you know, if you don't have the money, research and work hard at it because there's grants out there. Ontario Arts Council, um, Indigenous Screen Office, Canadian Council for the Arts. There's a lot of grants out there, a lot of avenues out there to go. But pardon me, if you do have the money, I think the route to go is to find somebody seasoned at grant writing to help out with that process and that. So that's kind of my word of advice for that type of thing. Like it can happen, but maybe you need your foot in the door first. And that's how a lot of these things get started is you get a grant or two and then you're kind of in the system and it helps you a lot.
So one of the things obviously is messaging. So the big thing is, as you as like the filmmaker, the creator, what is the message that you want people to take out of it?
About the process or about the actual
About the
film?
actual people who see the film. Like, what message do you want the film to give?
I think it is I don't know if it's a message heavy film. I mean, I'm out to entertain. I mean, there's, you weave a lot of tapestry in there of entertaining, making people laugh because that's in the film, some action, and also the subtext. And we've spoke about it, like that is in there. And I think at the end of the day, that when it reaches that Indigenous community, when I go to Six Nations and I show it to that Indigenous audience, it's going to really resonate with them. They're going to understand it and see it. For that non-Indigenous audience, they're going to be entertained by it, they're going to enjoy it, and they'll see some of that subtext. They'll see Sarah Blackice nailing up a poster for missing women. There's talk of the connectivity of our communities. There's a lot of family nuances in it and stuff like that. And I think people will get that and see it, and I think it'll register with them.
That's awesome. Bill, any last words before we wrap up?
Looking forward to seeing the Damnation, and we'll look forward to the next film as well. And again, this is the anatomy, physiology of making a film. And again, it's close to our heart in Northern Ontario and cultural teachings and awareness. And so it's been one of those Backroad Bill podcasts first.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't get to?
I don't think so. Like I said, thanks for having me out. I mean, this is kind of the tough part now. I mean, the 3 years is done, and it's a very cathartic period. All of a sudden, to see that film and there's special moments along the way when you're editing it that you all of a sudden, oh, that really works. Oh, wow, that was a real moment. There's always special little things, but I can get it done. I can make it happen. And then there's this stuff. There's the distribution, and there's this, is there going to be a avenue for streaming platforms? I don't know. It's a $30,000 film. So at one point, when people were excited and talking about it or asking me about it all the time, I can't wait to see your film. I can't wait to see your film. I was worn out. This was a tough one. This was a real mountain to climb because I was working full time through all of it. You know what I mean? We lived an entire lifetime in 3 years. People came and people went. People got along and people didn't. There was big change. There was successes. There was failures. And at the end of it, here we're sitting on this wonderful little film. It is a really special little film. So it's funny how these things go, that all of a sudden it's done and it's like, it was all worth it. It really was. And I knew it would be. It was just, I needed to dig in and be tenacious. And that's what we did. And I was lucky that I had people don't need to buy into your dream. People don't need to, get what you're doing or what you are setting out to do. I was very fortunate because I had people that did on this. And that's an anomaly in life, I think. But I was very fortunate and it helped me get it across the finish line, that there was people that were as connected and believed in this as much as I did in that. And it's just not, it doesn't always happen that way, but it did in this case.
Absolutely. We wish you the best of luck in your future trying to get this off the ground. If it does get released, and hopefully it does, let us know, and we will make sure to push it out on our socials as well. Maybe have you back on. We'll have to see. But thank you once again for joining us.
I'll predict that Chris will be back onto the Backroads Bill podcast.
There we go. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Well, big thank you to Chris for jumping on the program with us, and I really do hope that this movie ends up getting distributed. It looks really interesting. Some of the messaging and allegories I think could be very important and very interesting as well, so I'm looking forward to checking it out. So if this does get a public release, I'm going to be one of the first people who are going to be in on it. I know Bill will also be right there as well. So I hope you, the listener, enjoyed this spooky Halloween edition of the Backroads Bill podcast. Of course, you can find us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. The video version of this podcast is on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and you can always find us at NorthBayEcho.ca. New episodes of the Backroads Bill podcast drop every single Wednesday morning, first thing when you wake up. Also, check out our other Echo podcasts on the network, like To North Bay with Love. Yesterday, I quizzed Lisa on her North Bay knowledge. We played the game, How Well Do You Know North Bay? It was a lot of fun. I highly suggest you check it out and see how many answers you got right. You might be surprised at some of your lack of knowledge of the town and some of the history that surrounds it. And maybe you learn a thing or two. You'll see. Also, check out our Echo Essentials newsletter, where you can keep up to date with news in the area, the newest podcasts on the network, and events happening around the city. You can sign up for that at NorthBayEcho.ca, and, well, that wraps things up. So we will see you next Wednesday, which, by the way, I want to just tease this out for next week's episode. That show is going to rock. And if you don't understand the pun, you'll have to come back next week for another Backroads adventure.
North Bay Echo is proud to partner with Twigs Coffee Roasters, a part of the community since 1995. Twigs offers a wide selection of quality beans, fresh roasted in-house every day. Find your favorite specialty drinks at our espresso bar, rejuvenate with freshly squeezed juice, or treat yourself to mouth-watering selections from our gourmet deli. And don't forget our irresistible fresh baked goods, including uncompromising gluten-free options. Twigs has 5 locations to serve you, from North Bay to Sturgeon Falls to Sudbury. Order online for pickup at twigs.ca. And coming soon, you'll be able to order fresh roasted coffee beans direct to your doorstep from our distribution center in North Bay.